Thank you. I know I just said I'm going to recording. Let's do it. First of all, we're going to explore an idea that is not just about Rosh Hashanah. Have you ever seen these names on the screen before? No, because I'm not sharing the screen. There you go. Now you should see some things. Have you ever heard Yamim HaNoraim, or Days of Awe? When you think about awe, knowing that somehow has to do maybe for Hashanah, or even if you just want to think about awe as the word is, it's totally fine. What kind of picture you would add to represent that? If you unmute and describe like that picture for everyone, if you're there, if there is no one there, where it is.
I always think of something like awesome or awe-inspiring, which for me is something like beyond my control. So like I would think of like the Grand Canyon. I can't replicate the Grand Canyon. It's just there and it's beautiful, and there's like no really good ways to describe it. It makes you almost speechless, but not quite.
I like that. Who else? What's your picture?
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay. I was kind of thinking similarly to Hannah, like national monuments and things in nature. And then along that lines, I started thinking of things that aren't maybe the greatest, but like hurricanes and tornadoes that are just, there's no way that human nature could stop that. That's what I think of.
Yeah, I was going to say some amount of almost fear, but not fear the way you normally think of it, more like overwhelm and that lack of control, as we said.
There are some translations, especially some like older translations, that would translate Noraim as fear. There is a different word for the fear we're usually talking when we say feared, which is pachad. It's like which is more connected to scared, to like when you're like afraid or of that kind of fear. It's more like pachad. Or it might be feared because of lack of control, because of its greatness, that it exists in the world and so on. And in some ways, especially when you think about God, there was I think today we are more open to many other more positive versions of God. But remember that for many generations, for many people, God was oppressive a little bit, right? You should fear God, because that's the punishment is coming, and that was the way to control people and make sure that they're behaving like that religious leader figure wanted people to behave, right? So there is a little bit about that theology of fear in that as well. And in Judaism, we have that theology as well. Ira is the same root actually of Noraim. Ira is that kind of like awe, fear of God, and Ahava, which is love. And we have both theologies. So we do things for love, do things for awe or fear in that sense. And even though it's clear in the most classical Jewish sources that, of course, love is better, there's still a level of Ira that is always good to be there. That's how usually the rabbis play with that.
Yeah, now that you say that the word is sometimes translated that way, I think that's where I got the association, was you explaining that translation early, like in January or something. I think there might have been a Beit Midrash where we were reading something with the translation of fear, and you explained the awe thing, and it stuck.
Could be. Here is my picture. I took this picture a couple months ago in Lake Tahoe. And that was I think Hannah mentioned a little bit earlier about those places like the Grand Canyon, right? I never been there. We went for a hike. This is like a small corner of the lake. The real lake is like the one you see in the back. And for me, was one of those moments, just sit there and stare for hours, not knowing how to process all of that. This is an interesting way for us to open talking about Rosh Hashanah and the entire season, which is connected to that. Because this is actually going to be part of one of the sermons I'm going to still write, because they're not fully written yet. So hopefully will be written and delivered in Rosh Hashanah, about how our tradition wants us to feel certain things at certain times of the year. We have a mitzvah in Sukkot to be happy. On Tisha B'Av, we want to feel the loss, right? There are feelings that our tradition wants us to feel during the year. And that level of awe with, we're going to be talking about creation of the world. Isn't that awesome in that sense, right? Like, wow, like, is it the time for me to really think where it all come from? And especially with the kids, we use a lot of the metaphor that Rosh Hashanah is the birthday of the world, right? So how it all came to be, how was day one, and so on. So there is a little bit about our tradition trying to bring to us that feeling that we need to look at the world with that reverence for its existence in some ways. There are, of course, debates on that because we're Jews. How long are the Yamim HaNoraim? I would say that traditionally is between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, including. But so we call it in Hebrew Aseret Yemei Tshuva, the 10 days of Tshuva, which is there only in English. But those Aseret Yemei Tshuva are kind of the same thing as Yamim Noraim. But some people say that actually the 40 days from the beginning of Elul, which is the last Jewish month of the calendar, Rosh Hashanah is the first of the first, and 10 days until Yom Kippur, those 40 days are what we call Yamim HaNoraim. And then you might ask, what is Heshbon HaNefesh? What is this weird word of what we are supposed to be doing in this time of the year? So Rosh Hashanah has two things here because there are always 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. There are some holidays that in Israel is only 1 day and outside of Israel is 2. Anyone have heard about that? Knows any idea why?
I've heard of it because you played dreidel different in Israel, but I don't know why.
You play dreidel differently in Israel. It's true. It's not connected to that. The dreidel, the phrase says, Nes Gadol Haya Po, Nes Gadol Haya Sham. Those are the 2 phrases. Po literally means here, Sham literally means there. So the phrase is, a big miracle happened here, a great miracle happened there. That's the major difference. But Hanukkah is one of the holidays where everyone celebrates 8 days no matter what. There is no extra day of Hanukkah. Emily.
The reason is so that you can be sure that you celebrate on the correct day. If you were further from Israel, you wouldn't be sure exactly when the day was supposed to be. So as an extra safety, you celebrate twice so that at least one of the days will be correct.
But it's in the calendar. How am I gonna not know what the right day is?
It wasn't always in a calendar, so obviously people didn't always have access to calendars so readily. Like if you were way far away and in a place where the calendar was different, for example.
So how people would know the calendar? Anyone knows any idea how they would actually do that kind of stuff in the old days?
By looking at the stars and the moon.
Looking at the stars, mostly the moon.
Agricultural?
So one is looking at the moon, right? And this is actually, all of that is taught in the section of the Talmud about Rosh Hashanah. The first half of the Mishnah about Rosh Hashanah is about that, and the second half is about Shofar. Those are the two major things for the Mishnah written 2,000 years ago about Rosh Hashanah. There's a ritual when anyone who sees the new moon, which is a very weird expression because you never see the new moon, that's exactly the point. But when you see basically that is the new moon day, because you don't really see, you just see the side and all of that, you must come to the Beit Din, to the rabbinic court of the town, and you should testify, and they're very serious about this testimony, and tell everyone, I saw the moon. And they have specific questions that they would ask you, where in the sky did you see? Oh, I was looking that way, and it was very, very low. The rabbis knew a lot of astronomy, and they would say, no, that's not this time of the year, the moon actually should appear over there. Right, so they could tell if but that was kind of an honor to be the one to come and say, hey, I saw the moon. A lot of people maybe want to do that. So the rabbis had a lot of systems to make sure that people really knew that. And Jewish months, they have either 29 or 30 days, because it depends if someone saw the moon. If someone saw the moon on the 29th, they proclaim that the next day is the first of the next one. If no one saw the moon on the 29th, it means that this is a 30-day month, and the next day is going to be the 30th, and automatically the day after is going to be the first. So this is the lunar cycle that our calendar is both solar and lunar. We have the months are lunar and the year is solar. The Muslims calendar is just lunar. The Christian Gregorian calendar is just solar. We're complicated, we do both. And in that time, because someone had to see the moon, tell the rabbis had to tell everyone, might take a day until the message carries on and everyone knows when the month starts. So then they can count until the holiday, right? So people, how they would know about Rosh Hashanah, they would actually know the last month and count the entire month to that. You won't wait until the day off to hear, oh, it's today, great, let's do it, right? So they've been counting at least since the last month. Pesach is on the 15th, Shavuot is on the 15th, Shavuot is on the 5th, Sukkot is on the 15th. So those are the three other major important holidays, the ones that get 2 days, one extra, when just to make sure that outside of Israel and outside of Israel in their time, it meant Babylon, which is where today's Iraq and Iran, which within a day, the word would travel. They had systems with fire, they had systems with shofar, they had multiple systems to carry on the message. Rosh Hashanah is not the case. Rosh Hashanah is 2 days both in Israel and outside of Israel, because it's a holiday that they say it's such a big holiday that we celebrate 2 days. Both days are actually important. The trick thing is that we technically should do everything exactly the same on both days. But there are some blessings that if we make on the first day, it doesn't make any sense to make on the second day. You all probably know the Sheheyanu, the blessing made for something we do for the first time. So we say that on the first day. What do we do on the second day? I already did yesterday. Yesterday was new for me. So there's a tradition that on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, you wear something new, a new shirt or something like that, or you eat a new fruit of that season that just came out. I think now in the world, people have all the fruits all year round, but imagine places where it's not the case, or specific, very unique fruits that it's not like that, and make sure that in your dinner, the second night, you're gonna have something like that. So it's Sheheyanu on also something else new, just to guarantee there's something new, right? Because we don't want that to happen. Questions so far? So let's move on to this weird word, Teshuvah. Teshuvah is also repentance or atonement, is also to return or turn around. And we're gonna even see a video for the expression minding the gap that I think is a very interesting concept, and is also the word for answer. So do you know the answer? Do you know the tshuva, like that's modern Hebrew, it's used all the time. And tshuva is also the name for rabbinic, is a specific kind of rabbinic writing. When we have a problem, we have a shayla, we have a question, the rabbi gives a tshuva, the rabbi gives an answer. So for example, the most famous of the past year was about pandemic. The rabbis had to write a bunch of tshuvot, a bunch of those papers. Can we do Zoom on Shabbat? Who gets priority for ventilators? Is it okay to require vaccination from a religious standpoint? All of those questions were asked by people, and the rabbis gave religious answers to those and so many others. There's many websites of the religious institutions that collect them have sections on COVID now, because it's something completely new that if we just look into our sources, you won't find necessarily the answer. You have to make sources from all over the place, and that's what the rabbis are doing to give one answer based on these sources. I think this is the correct answer. So that's another meaning of tshuva. But we're going to be focusing on this idea of repentance, returning, and minding the gap in this time of the year. I'm going to show you 2 videos, and all of these people are my teachers. And just so you know, this first guy here on the left, he's the Rabbi Artson, he's the dean and the vice president of American Jewish University, which is the program that we're using. He's like the top rabbi, the boss. And Rabbi Adam Greenwald, the one here on the right. Alisa knows him from when she was studying with him earlier online in Los Angeles. And he is the one who really wrote the book that we are using as a guide and the lesson plans and everything.
Can everyone else hear and I can't?
Sorry, say it again.
We can't hear it. I think maybe
You can hear it.
did you mute when it was playing maybe?
Let me see now.
Tshuva is
Can
an
you hear now?
ancient Hebrew word that can be defined in several different ways. On the literal level, it means to turn. And there's a way in which every year we're back at the same spot again, just as the planet turns around the sun.
What it means to me, like what I find so interesting about it, is that it combines the sense of apology with this sense of healing.
I define tshuva as the Jewish technology of self-improvement. It is the recognition that all of us, whatever our flaws, are perfectible.
I think one of the things I love most about the high holidays is that it's not actually about getting right with God as the first step. It's about getting right with the people in our lives and doing the hard work that if we've done something that we've kind of tucked away or we haven't faced of upsetting or hurting somebody in our lives, then we have to address that first.
We reach out to people who we feel responsible for some of their pain, and we try to take some of that pain away by making amends. We have lots of opportunities to have serious conversations with God, whatever that looks like to you.
This act of tshuva is not just to say I'm sorry in most cases. It's to actually go through the steps of tshuva, which is that you recognize you did something wrong, you express regret for that, you do the most that you can to make up for whatever harm you've done. And then the real test is that when the same kind of situation happens again, you act differently.
There is nothing worse than the blanket, like, I'm sorry if I hurt you, tshuva. Like, it doesn't, that to me doesn't actually mean anything.
The moment you regret the choice you made, the moment you make amends and you seek to make whole the person or the people who were wronged, you're no longer the person who committed that first error, that first sin. And that's really what repentance is about. Repentance is saying we're not trapped by the past. Choices that we made don't own us. We own them. And so we can turn them around.
It's about a turning. It's about taking the first steps. It's about coming home.
Any first reactions to this video before we see the next one?
I like the idea that by repenting or reevaluating, we are no longer the same person at all. Like the idea that we as people become different, as opposed to like you're improving but the same. It's an interesting way of framing it for a fresh start.
I also like the idea that it's about, your relationship and your connection with other people, not just your relationship with God. So it's kind of, because anyone can be like, oh God, I'm sorry, but who's really there to hold you accountable but yourself? So when you bring this idea of, going to people and with a true intention of, I'm sorry for what I did, and this is what I want to do to make amends, it's more of holding yourself accountable for your actions.
I love what you said, because it's a very common mistake across the spectrum that through the prayers, we can just say we're sorry to God and everything is okay. And that was never the case for Jewish tradition. We consider that we have some commandments that are between us and God, and some that are between us and our fellows. And if you hurt someone, you praying to God for repentance doesn't do anything for us. That's classical Jewish theology. It's not even something modern. It never worked. We don't believe that prayer has this power that you talk to God and now Lord doesn't hate you anymore, right? If you did something wrong to someone, this is, as I was saying, that there are moments in the calendar that our tradition wants us to go through certain processes. This is one of them. We're not gonna go over a year holding that grudge, holding back, holding that relationship in some way, but you must go out and do the work right now. And yes, this is also a moment for the things we believe that are between you and God, that you can also repent from those and correct, and through the prayer experience, be fine with those as well. We're going to talk a little bit more about that part between us and God and that kind of tshuva more when you talk about Yom Kippur next week. Any other comments about that? Let's see the next video about minding the gap.
When I think about tshuva, I think about being in the British subway, in the tube, and they have those signs up that all say, mind the gap. I know what kind of person I want to be, and I know what kind of person I am a lot of the time. And there's a gap between the ideal and the real. Tshuva literally means to return. And when I think about what I'm supposed to be doing during the high holiday season, I'm supposed to be minding the gap. I'm supposed to be returning from how I've gotten away from myself back to the version of myself that I want to be.
Any comments about this next perspective about minding the gap and the best versions of ourselves? I think it connects really well with what Rabbi Artson said in the first video about that. I think Emily commented on that we take control over that choice, that actually everything is about the choices we make. And this is a moment where we can not do a full reset, but at least go back to the last time where we saved the game and take a different path, right? We go back in that sense, we return in that sense of knowing that we make also bad choices throughout our year, throughout our lives. And this is a moment for us to correct the path, to go back to our core, to go back to where do we want to be. And in some ways, I think it's way more cheesy if you think about how it actually happens in American society, but it's the New Year resolutions, right? This year I'm gonna go on a diet. That's the most, and go to the gym. Those are the most famous ones that everyone does and never follow up, right? But maybe this year is the one, let me try. And then you sign up for the gym in January, and in February you never go again, right? So in some ways, there is also a moment like that in the Jewish tradition for us to go back to our goals, go back to our path that we wanted to follow, and maybe correct something so we can try again. It doesn't mean that we're gonna get it right this time, but at least we're reminded with the possibility of trying it again. That other name we saw here in that idea of time is Cheshbon HaNefesh. Cheshbon in modern Hebrew means the receipt. So if you go to a restaurant in Israel and you want to pay, you can ask for the Cheshbon, right? Cheshbon HaNefesh, Nefesh means soul. So you're doing that accounting of the soul. You're looking inside and processing literally item by item of your Cheshbon, like, did I do this right? Did I do that right? A lot of the metaphors we talk about are about the scale. So the old kind of scale that you have, like the two plates. What are you putting in the scale of things you did right, and what are putting in the scale of things you did wrong? I can't count the amount of times I saw children programming that they build a huge scale, and the kids don't even know what that kind of scale looks like. Now it's everything digital. And we do any kinds of activities, so we can like play with both sides, like what would you put in this side, what would you put in that side? And it's, I think, one of the hardest Jewish practices, because it's just you with yourself. There's nothing else. Can you share that with your partner? Of course. Are you someone who likes to write and maybe publish? Sure, go for it. There's nothing preventing you from doing that publicly, although no matter how much you work to make that public, there is a level of that only happens inside you, right? It's something very personal, something that it's kind of step number 0 to start this whole process. How can I do tshuva if I have not done Cheshbon HaNefesh? How can I know where I need to correct my path and mind the gap if I don't even know what the gap is? So Cheshbon HaNefesh is this idea that we look back and start preparing for the tshuva process. There are 2 elements that are interesting for this. One is the service of Slichot, which we did last Saturday night for the first time. The joke is that the real thing is Sephardim, Jews that came from from Northern Africa and Asia, Spain, Portugal, they do Slichot services the entire month of Elul. So they're gonna start in that right here in the very beginning of Elul. They start with the services of Slichot. Usually it starts on Saturday night after Shabbat, and then you keep doing that for the entire month, early in the morning before service starts. For the Ashkenazim, Jews from Poland, Germany, Eastern Europe in general, which is my case, we usually do only the Saturday before Rosh Hashanah. That's when they start, unless Rosh Hashanah starts Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, because we believe that if it starts Saturday until Tuesday, there's not enough time. So then we back up 1 week. If Rosh Hashanah falls on Wednesday or Thursday or Friday, then we start on that week with Slichot. It's a very unique service, very musical usually, and has specific poems and readings. We start to read some of the prayers that are only for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur as well. And slicha literally means I'm sorry. So the service of slichot is this moment for us to really start processing all of that in a more liturgical way throughout our prayers, throughout our services. And now that I said the real thing, the joke is, why did Sephardim start all the way back in Elul and the Ashkenazim start only the week before Rosh Hashanah? Is because we sin less. So we don't need to repent the entire month. 1 week is enough for them. The Sephardim who sin a lot, they need the entire month. And the other element of that is the shofar. The Rambam, famous rabbi, lived in Spain and Egypt in the 1100s. He's the one who says that shofar is like an alarm clock. The sound of the shofar is kind of like waking you up and saying, hey, time has come, time to do it. Because no one really wants to do Heshbon Nefesh. It hurts. You want me to confront my flaws and all the mistakes I did. I'm going to avoid that. I don't want that. Stop. So the shofar comes to tell you, nope, that's the moment. That's when we do it. So we blow the shofar every morning for the entire month of Elul and Rosh Hashanah. Until Rosh Hashanah, we don't blow between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And then we blow at the very end of Yom Kippur. I'll get you a little bit more about shofar in a bit. But the idea is that it's helping us prepare for that. And the word shofar is related to the verb leshaper. So for those who are already thinking about Hebrew roots, what is the root? Is always a 3-letter, sometimes 4, usually 3, root about any Hebrew word. Everything that derives from that root somehow shares some kind of meaning with that. So for example, let me see a good one. Book is called sefer. Sefer is book. To tell a story is lesaper. So sefer, lesaper, F and P sound, the fe and the pe are the same letter, so they're interchangeable. So lesaper, I'm telling a story on the sefer, right? It's clear that that works a lot in Hebrew, in English not so much, but we have things like that in English where you see a word in the middle there that like hints into another one in the meaning. Shofar comes from leshaper, which means to improve. So part of the idea of hearing the sound of the shofar is that we need to improve and become better selves. That's my favorite meaning of all of that. Since we're talking about shofar, we're gonna jump into shofar and then we go back to the other part. I am kind of addicted to talking about shofar. It's one of my favorite rituals. This is my first shofar that my parents got to me when I was a kid. We came to the store. We're here in the US visiting family, and my mom said, take any shofar you want. Me and my brother came back with the shofar that is this big, like our height at that time. And my mom looked at us and said, no, you're not getting this one. Here's our shofar. And that's what we got. And so she said, I'm not putting that in the suitcase. Like it doesn't fit. So we got this. We were kids, and that's how I learned with this little one. The sound is very different. And I always like to play. My grandma had one at home too. I don't know what happened to the shofar. Maybe she still has that. But you can't do it on Shabbat. So she would make me come to her house when it's not Shabbat, because I always had dinner there for Shabbat, just so I could play with the shofar. And then years later, I was in Israel when I was like 18, 19. My parents came to visit, and then we bought this one, which is a little bit better quality. And then I got another one later. And then last year, I got a gift from someone that I bought finally my big shofar. This one is in the synagogue right now. So what is the shofar? What do we do with all of that? First of all, it's kind of very interesting and weird at the same time that we have such an ancient instrument that is still so present and real for a lot of Jews, right? What religions really like blow the horn of an animal still as part of their religious services. Like so many things are more modern. Why do we still do this weird thing, right? And it's pretty weird if you stop to think about that, right? Shofar had many, many meanings in the Torah. The shofar would be used for starting a war. You have to tell all the army to get together because we're going to war. They would blow the shofar. Shofar would be used to tell everyone that someone died in the community. So you don't know exactly what, but you hear the shofar randomly in the days to tell that someone died. There are discussions if they were also used for the new month we were talking about earlier to tell that the new month has come. So shofar had multiple uses, and Rosh Hashanah was one of them. Nowadays, that's the only one that exists. Everything else doesn't exist anymore. We only do Rosh Hashanah. The mitzvah, the commandment of hearing the sound of the shofar, is only on Rosh Hashanah day, both days of Rosh Hashanah. This is the day you must hear the shofar. The entire month of Elul we're talking about that we're doing that to prepare is a tradition. It's something nice that the rabbi said, let's do that and add one more opportunity for that to prepare for that. And the one at the very end of Yom Kippur, usually a lot of people think is the most important one, is the least important one, is just a tradition because we don't blow the shofar on Yom Kippur, but people really like it. And then they do one at the very end, basically to say the day is over, we're done. So this is when we do and how we do. Questions so far before I get very nerdy into the animals and where it comes from? Hello, Laura. So I brought some pictures of some animals and some shofar wrote, so you can know where they come from. Let's start with number one. Look at the very top left of your screen. You see that looks like a cow horn, right? Or a bull. Why that is not kosher? Even though cow is kosher, it's totally fine. Why is the cow not kosher?
Well, it's shorter than the other ones, but I've seen a lot of shofars that are pretty short. So I don't think that's it.
One of the explanations is because we had the golden calf. What is a calf? Calf is a young cow, right? We don't want to remember the golden calf in that moment. That's the worst sin we ever committed as a people. So in order to not bring the idea of the golden calf, we do not use a cow's horn. I don't know if the sound would be good or no. People just don't make them. Like I don't even know what that would be. Never saw one. Although many people who live in farms use all kinds of horns as instruments to call the animals and so on. They might use maybe cow horns for that kind of stuff. So it exists for sure as an instrument. We just don't use it. The most famous one is the ram. So those two are from rams, which is number 7 there. This little buddy with a very twisted horn. The major difference between the ones I'm holding and the one you see there might be the age of the animal. So those are probably younger than that one. And these ones are polished. You can see they're very shiny. You see the light reflecting on it. So nowadays people create like real tools and really polish that to look like that. They're not, you never see an animal having such a polished horn. On the contrary, they're very rough. But some actually don't polish, and I love those. I think they're beautiful. But ideally, the shofar should have some kind of curve like that. This one is kosher, but not ideal. Usually you want something a little bit more curved than that. And why the ram is the ideal one? Have you ever heard about the story of the binding of Isaac? When Abraham takes his son Isaac up the mountain. This is chapter 22 of Bereshit, of the first book of the Torah. And he's about to sacrifice his son because God told him to. And in the very, 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 very last minute, when he's about to do it, an angel appears, holds up Abraham's hand, and a ram comes up, and his horn is entangled in the bushes. And then Avram stuff, and God provides then a real sacrifice, which is that ram, and then Isaac survives. So that ram is a symbol of salvation in that sense, right? It's a symbol of tshuva, that he did not sacrifice his son, but the ram came up to do that. And this is the Torah reading of second day of Rosh Hashanah. And that's the most important Torah reading we do during Rosh Hashanah. A lot of people would imagine we read the beginning of Torah in Rosh Hashanah, because that's the beginning of the world. No, that's the one because it talks about this element of faith in God and tshuva and repentance and so on. The reading of the day before, the first day, is the birth of Isaac and his Brit Milah. So it only exists actually to lead the story into the next day. So chapter 21 is first day, chapter 22 is second day. But not always Jews had rams around to get shofarot from. So any kosher animal who is not a cow and has a hollow horn, not every shofar is hollow inside. Some horns, depending on the animal, you might have other stuff. You might have cartilage inside many times, but that can be easily removed. There are some that it's not just cartilage, they're completely full. Those cannot be, you cannot drill a hole through and make a shofar. That needs to be from an animal which is naturally hollow. So bring some of our friends here. Look who they are. So the fourth, I've never seen before. That is a specific kind of sheep. Number 3 here is the ibex, which is an animal that exists in Israel. So it's not a common shofar to see around, but because we don't domesticate them. So it's not like you have easily like the ram that we do domesticate and kill for meat purposes, for leather purposes. That is more like a wild animal. So also it's less natural to have them available. And one that is very, very famous, and that's the big shofar that I mentioned earlier that I got, is the kudu, this animal on the top right, which also exists in the area of Israel, but mostly towards east, especially Jews from Yemen would have that shofar. That's whenever you see a big one, that's the animal that it comes from, and I think it's beautiful. And here I brought some of the most fun ones. Oh, this is definitely not number 2. This is another one. This is a kind of sheep. Oh, this is 6. Then that one here, number 2, should be number 6. This is more like this shofarot. It's also a ram. It's probably a female ram, which is called Eel, because I had to learn that a couple months ago when I was like, wait. There's so many names where the female, the male, the child, and all of that. One day I Googled through for cows, for sheep, and all of that to learn all the differences. And you can see that it's also very rough, right? And later you can polish this. The most interesting ones here, 9 and 10, because it's the 10 you actually see in Israel. You can find that to buy from the ibex, from the Gemsbok. So technically it's kosher, but again, ideally they should be twisted. So we usually don't use that. And number 9 from pronghorn. I never heard about the animal, never saw that shofar ever in my life. Don't know anyone who does that. It's kind of a weird one because it's not straight, but that little thing that comes off is not hollow. That part is closed. So actually the hollow part is just one that goes to the end. And horns at the very end, they are not hollow. They have a point, right? Because they use the horn for defending themselves from attacking and so on. So it's actually cut. They use some kind of tool to really cut through, so you can have a hole on that side, so you can actually blow the shofar. And they really use also some kind of drill to make the hole here better, and the mouthpiece they polish around, so it really fits well in your mouth. Questions so far about shofar and all this craziness?
There was a question in the chat, I think Hannah asked about what people do who are vegan.
What the vegan people do. So first of all, shofar, you don't have to kill the animal to get. An animal who lived an amazing life and died of old age, you can use the body, right? So you cannot use that for eating. That's the major issue. We cannot eat a carcass, as we usually call, but you can use the leather for writing stuff, manuscripts. You can use the horn. So an animal that died naturally, and many vegan people are fine with that. They're not against using the animal, they're against killing the animal, right? But if the animal died naturally later, it's fine. I never seen any solution in the sense of creating something instead. The other thing I heard from some vegan people is, since someone already killed the animal, not necessarily you, it's okay to use it, because then let's at least give an opportunity to make that even useful and holy instead of dying for nothing. But some don't really like the answer. They say you have to wait for an animal who dies naturally. It's the same thing I heard about tefillin, the black boxes we wear here and here for prayer, also can be done from a carcass. So there are some vegan people that they really try to find if there is a tefillin that was done this way, or if someone else had and the person died and the tefillin has no owners anymore, you'd acquire from someone. You never buy one, because then you'd be stimulating killing more animals and all of that. But if you get as a gift from someone, better than going to the trash, right? So I've seen, depending why you're vegan, how you're vegan, you might find one or the other more interesting.
Does it specifically say it has to come from an animal? Like, could a 3D printed shofar be a thing?
I don't think so. For sure, they did not think about the 3D printed, because that was not a thing for our ancestors or even for us a couple years ago. But the shofar is known to be an animal's horn. And our kind of consciousness towards animals nowadays is the most modern thing it could be, right? Until 50 years ago, those questions were not really part of our society, right? It's so natural to consume animals in all ways possible.
Is there any conversation about if we'll continue to use real animal horns once all of these animals become extinct or become endangered?
I would say for sure, killing an animal to make the shofar of an animal that is in danger of extinction, stuff like that, I would say that shofar is not kosher for sure. You should not endanger an entire species for that. There's plenty of animals that you for sure can find of other species that are not, and this is definitely the way to go. There is one interesting mitzvah, which you should never slaughter the parent and the kid on the same day. And one of the explanations for that is that you prevent extinction of a species, because with that, you have to then the next day go and kill the other, but at least you prevented one and that one survived, then can carry on and so on, and then you can rethink about the next day and not kill the other one. But it's one of the ideas of that mitzvah is to really prevent from extinctions. Emily,
Yes,
Oh, just because I was listening to a discussion about, I heard the discussion about vegan and ethical animal horns. I don't know whether this is possible or not, but do you know of any shofars that are made? There are some animals that naturally shed their horns and regrow them. And you know, if you're going through the woods, you'll find animal horns on the ground. Do you know of any shofars that are made from animals that naturally shed their horns? I was only familiar with ram's horn up until now, but
yeah, I would say the most traditional is the ram horn. So I never heard about that. But it's a good question. It's interesting. We need to look into it.
But typically there's enough shofar somewhere in the world where they just get passed down throughout families.
Yes.
Hmm.
Like I have 4 now. I can have 4 kids. They're all gonna get a shofar. There is even a discussion in the Talmud that on Shabbat we don't blow the shofar. The reason why is that we can't carry the shofar on Shabbat, and they couldn't guarantee that the shofar will be in the synagogue, so to prevent people from carrying, there is no shofar on Shabbat, except if you're in the temple, because there was a tradition that there was no chance there will be no shofarot in the temple. Imagine the amount of sacrifices that happened there daily. They had plenty of animals dying there and plenty of shofarot there. So in the temple, there was always shofarot, and that was never a question, that to the point that even on Shabbat, we would allow them to be used because for sure the shofar was there. Let's talk a little bit about the sounds of the shofar. There are 3.5 kind of sounds. I'm going to get to the half in a second. So one of them is called tekiah. The second one is called shivarim. And the third one is called truah. Tekiah, shivarim, truah. And the first one is 1. The second one is 3. The third one is 9. What? Yeah, how many blasts you do? The first one is just 1. The second one is 3. The third one is 9. But all of them have the exact same length. So the length of doing 1 tekiah, one should be the same length of the 3 and of the 9. So it's not like you do 9 long ones. The 9 have to be very, very short, so they have the same time as the 1. Why all of that? Because we don't know what's the right way to do. There are multiple opinions in the Talmud, so the rabbis created a way. Let's do all of them, so we're covering all the bases, and one of them is the correct. That's a very unique and traditional Jewish answer for anything, right? We don't know the right, we do all the ways possible. And in Rosh Hashanah, we go even beyond that. It's kind of crazy the amount of blasts we have because of that. So the tekiah goes like that. The shvarim is the same length, but 3. And then the truah is 9. It's at least 9. A lot of people were gonna do many, many more than that. You don't have to. And why 3.5? Because there is the last one called tekiah gdola, which is just a large, long tekiah. So usually it's the very end, the Baal Tokea, the person blowing the shofar, is just gonna go. And stay there for as long as you can. The idea of covering all the bases goes like that. We don't know the exact way to do, so we do the tekiah, shvarim, truah, tekiah 3 times. So it's gonna be what I'm gonna do 3 times. We'll do that 3 times. But maybe this is wrong. So we also have tekiah, shvarim, tekiah, because the major discussions about the shvarim and the truah. So then we do. That's the second one. Maybe this is wrong too. So instead of doing that, we also do. That's the third one, because we don't know which one is right. So do 3 of the first one, 3 of the second one, 3 of the third one. And at the very end of the last tekiah of the third one is the tekiah gdola, that goes long. This is on the day of Rosh Hashanah. During Elul, we do usually traditionally just Tekiah, Shvarim, Teruah, Tekiah, and that's it. And during Yom Kippur, at the very end, we just do the Tekiah Gdolah. We just do a long blast, and that's it. So the one that really we do all these things is Rosh Hashanah. To explain why the rabbis don't know what the shofar should sound like, what do you think that sound sounds like? What does it remind you? Is a sound that exists, let's call it nature, but we could call also human nature. Let me try to do it more clearly.
Like a baby crying?
Yes, the shofar is meant to be like a cry. The way we know that is because of the Aramaic translation of Teruah, that the Talmud sees that is the same word used for another story where a mother cried when her son died, and that's the same word used. So therefore, the Teruah has something to do with the crying. The only name that really appears in our early sources is the Teruah. The Shvarim doesn't exist. But when they're discussing the Teruah, they don't know if the cry is more like, or if the cry is more like, so they don't know exactly what kind of cry that is. So they have a dispute, and then they create both kinds of them. And that's how the Shvarim is created. And in order to cover all the base that we're doing the right kind of cry, we have all that kind of blasts in our services. Going back to what we're talking about, tshuva and everything, is actually very fit that sounds like a cry, right? It's part of the idea is to bring those emotions, the hard things that we usually put it aside, we don't deal with, right? Things that sometimes we want to cry because of them. And it's very rough, it's very natural, it's really deep into the human nature to be touched by a cry, right? Especially parents, right? They hear the baby cry, immediately, let's fix that, right? I cannot see another human being crying, cannot do something about that. So that's the origin of those blasts. Any questions so far? There is another video here, but I'm not going to play. I can send to you. Actually, let me get, at the end of the class, I'll give you the link so you can see that later. Let's go back to this. I don't know why I kept that order, but I think it's important to understand the shofar so we can understand the 4 names of Rosh Hashanah, which neither of them is Rosh Hashanah. So this holiday, all those 4 names you see there are exactly the same holiday. We're talking about Rosh Hashanah. And they appear in the Bible, in the Torah. So let's start with Yom Hadin, the last one. It literally means the day of judgment, the day of trial. Because there's this perspective that on Rosh Hashanah we're being judged by God, and our life is going to be determined in the next year by how we're judged on that day. So there are some prayers that we talk about. God is now going one by one, like sheep. That's the metaphor that is used a lot in our liturgy, in our prayers. That like the person who takes care of the sheep, the shepherd, thank you. So it's like God is like a shepherd counting his sheep, right? God counts us, looks through us, and that's why we talk about being written in the book of life. Maybe you heard that expression before. We wish everyone, may you be inscribed in the book of life, and then in Yom Kippur we say Chatima Tova. Chatima Tova means a good sealing, because in Rosh Hashanah we're inscribed in the book of life, and Yom Kippur we're sealed. So with all those metaphors are related to this idea of a day of judgment, that we're being judged by God. Yom HaZikaron has something to do with that. Literally means the day of remembrance. Remembrance of what? We are asking God to be remembered, in the sense that if you're remembered, it means that we remember for our good deeds. So we talk about the day of remembrance, so God would pay attention to us, would look at us, would take care of us, would protect us. Yom HaZikaron in modern Judaism is not usually associated with Rosh Hashanah. Barely anyone knows that it's a day used for Rosh Hashanah tradition. In the state of Israel, it was created a day which is called Yom HaZikaron Lechayalei Tzahal, and a very long name that was added later, which is the day we remember all the fallen soldiers of the army in Israel and all the victims of terrorism in that area. And because it's this long name, it just became Yom HaZikaron. So if you talk about Yom HaZikaron with anyone, it's the day right before Independence Day in Israel, their 4th of July, which is May 14 in the Gregorian calendar, but we follow the Jewish calendar, so it moves around May 14. And the day right before the independence, we have Yom HaZikaron as this day of remembering all the victims that perished so we could have this day. So that's the connection of being the day right before. And then we have those two names in the Torah, Yom Teruah, Yom Zichron Teruah. Yom Teruah is the day of the shofar blast, right? So it's the day when we do that. And Yom Zichron Teruah appears that as well. Zichron, as we can see, Zikaron up there, the day of remembrance, the same word basically, just a different form, is the day of remembrance of the Teruah. And the rabbis had a really hard time to figure out why the Torah mentioned that. So you need to think about Rosh Hashanah as a day when the shofar is not blown, but we talk about it. And they figure out that this was talking about Shabbat, because Shabbat we can blow the shofar, but remember the shofar blast. So Yom Zichron Teruah is for when Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbat. No one uses that name modernly to say anything about Rosh Hashanah. So where is the name Rosh Hashanah from? If the Torah never calls it Rosh Hashanah. Who knows what's the literal meaning of Rosh Hashanah? What is Rosh? Rosh is head. Shana is ear. So that's why I say Shana Tova during this time of the year, meaning a good year. Shana, ear, Tova, good. So Rosh Hashanah is the head of the year, meaning the beginning of the year. What's the problem with that? That in the Torah, when it says this is going to be the day of Yom Teruah, the day of the shofar blast, when is that? The first day of the 7th month. Wait, but isn't Rosh Hashanah the beginning of the year? Why is the Torah calling it the 7th month? The Torah calendar goes according to Yetziat Mitzrayim, with coming out of Egypt. That's when they started counting the months. So the first month according to the Torah is Nisan, which is the month of Pesach. Pesach is the first holiday according to the Torah calendar. Only later on in Talmudic times that Rosh Hashanah is going to be the beginning of the calendar for the years, for counting the years. We're going to see why. But in the Torah, Rosh Hashanah happens on the 7th month. So originally, the meaning of Rosh Hashanah had to do with this day of judgment, this day of the shofar blast, this moment of repentance. But they don't have originally this meaning of the beginning of the year. This is something that is added later. This is a text from the Mishnah of Rosh Hashanah. The first, that's how the entire chapter starts, talking about Rosh Hashanah, saying that Rosh has 4 different new years. We don't have just Rosh Hashanah, we have 4 of them. Arba'a Sheish Shanim Hem. We have 4. The first one is the 1st of Nisan, which we just mentioned, which is the first month according to the Torah, which is called the Rosh Hashanah Lamlachim, for the kings. Whenever you read the book of Kings, the book of Samuel, we talk about, and that king was king, for example, David was 30 years king over Jerusalem and a couple more in Hebron. we are counting the years based on Nisan. We don't count those years based on Rosh Hashanah. So if the king became king the month right before Nisan, just for a month, that is counted as a full year, right? So every Nisan that passes is considered a full year. So maybe there are kings that were king for 60 days. It can be said about them that they were kings for 2 years, because they were king for the first 30 days on that year, then Nisan came, they're king for 30 more, they died, they were king over for 2 years, even though it's just 60 days. Then, and also Nisan is the new year for the order of the festivals. So Pesach is the first, Shavuot is the second, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur comes later. First of Elul is the first one, is the first day of the year for animal ties, even though Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon disagree with that, and they say that this is actually with first of Tishrei. We only have 3 then, according to these rabbis. Of course, they lost the discussion because the text says we have 4. So, for example, there are laws about an animal, how old the animal can be for you to do this or do that, or you have to take the firstborn to the temple. All of that is based on that counting of Elul, which was the beginning of the last month. And then the first of Tishrei is the new year for counting the years and calculating Shemitah, very important word this year, and Yovel, the Jubilee years, which is every 50 years. What is Shemitah? Shemitah is every 7 years. Debts are canceled. So if you had a debt with someone, you don't have to pay it. People can go back to their homes, and the land rests for a year. We don't plant, we don't harvest anything during that year. This year, this Rosh Hashanah, we are studying Shemitah. So in Israel, there will be a lot of fields that are just not going to be, and it's a law that only applies to Israel. It does not apply here. It's a specific law for the land of Israel. So there are some fields in Israel that are not going to be worked on over this year. We count that from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. Yes, Laura.
I'm curious about what constitutes Israel with modern boundaries and biblical boundaries. How do we know where Shemitah actually applies?
So first of all, it only applies for Jewish-owned land, right? So even if it was part of the greater Israel in biblical times, if now no Jew owned that land, we cannot do it. So right now, let's say, I think they're talking about the biblical Israel. So if there are settlers in the West Bank, in the occupied territories, and they are technically bound by that, they should let the land rest there. Even though it's technically not considered the modern state of Israel, there's occupied territories. Same thing about Gaza, there are discussions if Gaza was actually part of the original Great Israel in the Bible, or even the north in the Golan, right? So those we need to see depending how you count. But I think because there was a time where the Great Empire actually had all those lands, I think that would be considered there. I remember seeing that, I think it was 7 years ago, maybe 14 years ago, that there was a big sign in Hebrew over a field. I was like on a bus going from one city to another and saying, Kan Shomrim Shemitah, here we keep Shemitah. It's like just a sign to say like this field, you're not gonna see anything. But the other reason for that is that you had crops that you planted the year before. Anyone can take those. You cannot harvest for yourself. They're left over for poor people, for anyone who wants to come and take. So that's also a sign for people like saying, hey, if you see anything here, come and take it. We're not taking, right? Otherwise they say, oh, it's a private property, I'm not gonna go in there. No, they say here we keep Shemitah, meaning it's for you. You can come and take it. And another thing that is important is that Orla, you cannot take the fruits from a tree for while the tree is until the tree is 3 years old. So let's say you want to get wine, you start planting your grapes. You cannot use those grapes to make wine for 3 years after you plant. After only 3 years, you can start using the fruits from that. It's also counted years from this year. And then we have another Rosh Hashanah that is actually the only one that we still kind of know nowadays, which is called Tu B'Shvat. It usually happens the end of January, early February. Here you see the discussion that some say is the first of the month of the Shvat, and some people say is the 15th of Shvat. Of course, the 15th one, Tu B'Shvat, now celebrating the 15th of the month of Shvat, and it's called the Rosh Hashanah La'ilanot, the New Year for the trees. And we still celebrate nowadays that one. The other two we don't really celebrate. So only after this text, which is about 2,000 years old, that Rosh Hashanah starts to become this thing about the new year. Questions about that? Now, I want to go back to our original conversation about food, because that's the most important thing in a Jewish holiday. What do we eat in Rosh Hashanah? So here you see a picture of apples and honey. Any idea why apples? Because it tastes good with honey.
Oh.
What are you gonna say, Elisa?
I'm not sure if I remember it fully, but I think what I had heard was that the way that apples grow, they like don't have the skin of protection or something, so they have to grow being more susceptible to different. I don't remember. It was like this whole sciencey explanation, but basically the fact that it grows without this like basic protection that a lot of other fruits do have is supposed to symbolize like being Jewish in a world that doesn't like Jewish people.
I like that. It's a good explanation. Many of the explanations we're going to give to all of that, they come after the tradition, right? We had the tradition and then people figure out an explanation for that tradition. One explanation that comes to my mind is that it's round. We're going to see there are a lot of round things. The round symbolizes the cycle, the year, that we are always coming back to it. And there are times we're up, there are times we're down. Life is like that. And so we're going to see a lot of things that are round. But the major reason that I know is actually, literally because it tastes good with honey. The important thing there is actually the honey and not the apple. We want to have a sweet year. So, but no one is going to just get like your finger in a honey jar and lick the finger. Your mom is going to complain. So we have more polite ways of dipping the apple in the honey. And there is usually a phrase that we say at night when on the dinner, when we eat that, may your ear be sweet. There is a phrase for that in Hebrew. And we say Borei Pri Adama, the blessing for the apple, and then we eat that. That's part of the kiddush of when we do the wine, the beginning of the meal. We also do apples and honey. And you see another thing in that picture that is traditional of Rosh Hashanah, the rimon in Hebrew, the pomegranate, also round. And there is a tradition that the pomegranate has 613 seeds. So a lot of people eat the seeds also on Rosh Hashanah. I was a very, very, very stubborn kid during religious school. Laura would have hated to be the director when I was a kid. And when I heard that from my teacher and I was 12, of course, I asked my mom to buy a pomegranate and I counted one by one. And my teacher was wrong. There are no 613, I can prove. Is way less than that, and that was my guess. I saw that like there's no chance there's 613 here. It's just a tradition that we say because there are many, so we say it's many like the amount, the number of commandments, the number of mitzvot, even though probably different fruits have different numbers also. It's not like every single pomegranate has the exact same amount of seeds, right? Depending on their sizes, where they come from, and so on. We talked about the fish head earlier, that we have the fish head because the fish always goes forward. Some people say there's some tradition because the fish always has their eyes open. And that's also some meaning of that. And that's also why a lot of people don't do that, because they don't want to have a fish with their eyes open sitting on the table. The challah bread that we do every Friday is different on Rosh Hashanah. We bake it, but instead of braiding it like we do usually, we make it round. Again, symbolizing the ear, the circle, and all of that. There is one very interesting tradition that I learned it for the first time maybe 6 or 7 years ago. My parents' best friends are Sephardic. So the husband of the couple was born in Egypt, moved to Brazil, was like 5 years old. And his mom and dad are still alive. They came from Egypt when they're like 20 something. They carry on all the Sephardic tradition. They speak French at home because Egypt was a French colony at that time, and that's the language that they learned there. And we get to their house for Rosh Hashanah there, which we never did. We usually go to our family. For some reason, our family was not doing a dinner that year, so they invited us to come over. And then they knew that I wanted to study to be a rabbi, so we're about to start Kiddush and all of that. And I see a lot of different ingredients on the table, like dates and nuts and a lot of stuff. And the grandmother of that family turns to me and say, "So you're going to be the rabbi, you do it, lead us in the Seder." Like, Seder? And then she was like, "Yeah, the Seder for Rosh Hashanah." It's like, I think you mean Pesach? That's when I have the Seder? No, I have the Seder. We do this, we do that. I have no idea what you're talking about. This is a huge Sephardic tradition that we eat certain things, and the same way we only have the honey as that weird thing we say a phrase like, "May your ear be sweet." The Sephardic have a tradition that we eat all other things, and all of them have a phrase that accompany that. And it's like a longer tradition of things that we eat. If you Google Sephardic tradition, Rosh Hashanah, Seder, you're gonna find all of that. And she was very, very, very surprised that I had no idea what she was talking about. She was in her 80s already. She probably hosted that dinner for the past at least 60, if not 80 years of her life, was always at her home. She never went to anyone's house for that day, so she never saw anything different. And she was so surprised to even know that Ashkenazim don't do that. I don't know, I think she was more surprised than I was. I think, yeah, for sure, they have a different tradition. And she was like, "No, you guys are just like crazy. Who are you? Like, this is Rosh Hashanah, right?" And then in Israel, I learned another tradition with a teacher of mine, that we can always add more simanim. Simanim means symbols of, we eat this thing because that thing means that, and we wish everyone that thing. So she is a Hebrew speaker and she loves puns. So we're eating schnitzel on that night. Schnitzel is chicken with breadcrumbs, right? So she said that schnitzel was part of her simanim that night, because in Hebrew, the word for schnitzel, which is not a Hebrew word, sounds like she'inatzil, schnitzel she'inatzil, right? And she'inatzil means that will be saved. So she said, "I hope that everyone will be saved this year." Schnitzel was part of our simanim for that year. So that kind of thing, that you can make puns in Hebrew, and people add all of that. It's very tradition that people really gather over for dinner, and different than Pesach, where the beginning of the dinner really takes an hour, maybe 2, maybe 3 hours, depending where you go. Rosh Hashanah is the opposite. We make Kiddush, we eat the apples. If you're Sephardic, you do all the other things, and that's it. We sit and eat. That's it. There's no big thing. Like at home, it's just a really, really nice meal, fancy with your best plates, best tablecloth, all the Jewish foods you love, and on and on and on. As we were saying before, there's a lot of like Jewish foods that we usually do them on Jewish holidays, right? There's a difference on eating matzah ball on a regular Wednesday night or eating matzah ball during Rosh Hashanah dinner, right? So a lot of those things, they appear more on those, but there's no requirement or anything like strict about how we do that. Any questions whatsoever about Rosh Hashanah? Anything you still have lingering there that is I cannot let this go without knowing it before you come to Rosh Hashanah? Good. You all have my email. Feel free to email me, ask anything you want, talk through anything. As I said in the beginning, we're really looking forward to have everyone around for the holiday. I started to invite some people over the summer to come eat here for Shabbat. And then I had to stop because of COVID, and hopefully soon I'll go back to that. And maybe next year, one thing we were planning and then decided to stop, I wanted to invite literally everyone in the congregation to come over for one night of Rosh Hashanah. That's the good thing about living in an apartment building and have like a huge space downstairs and get there and like have everyone there. And then I'm going to talk to Laura about that. Like, we're going to have to cancel that the day before. Let's not put any effort in that because it's not going to happen. And then we held that back, but it's one of the things that I really want to do. So maybe we're going to do in a month, 2 or 3 from now. We're all going to come here for a big reception. Hannah.
Laura's message in the chat reminded me, why are there different spellings of Lashana Tova? Like, I've seen it like 2 or 3 different ways on how to spell. Is it just like Americans trying to spell Hebrew?
Yes.
Okay.
Plus, they don't know Hebrew. It's how many double N's, double L's, double B's you use, like Shabbat, 1 B, 2 B's. Doesn't matter, it's bit. That's how we know, like that's it's in Hebrew, right? That's what we call transliteration. So my favorite meme about that is in Hanukkah. I think Hanukkah is the one that has the most amount of debate on how to. So it's like Hanukkah written one way, cross. Hanukkah written another way, Hanukkah cross. Another spelled cross, and at the very end, Merry Jewish Christmas, like something like that. Because like we can't figure out how to call Hanukkah, so let's say Merry Jewish Christmas. Like, get over it. I used to be very picky about how I would translate things, but that's the weird thing is depending what's your native language, you want to translate things differently. So I don't use a lot of the doubling, double B, double L for any of those things, because in Portuguese this is not a thing. We don't use double consonants to have a stronger sound. Here we use CH or KH for the ch sound because it doesn't exist in English because of German. Like Bach, the composer, right? B-A-C-H, that's the sound. So that's why we use CH. In Spanish-speaking countries, instead of CH, they use the J, the J, because that's the sound that J makes in Spanish. So instead of Baruch, last be B-A-R-U-C-H, it's going to be B-A-R-U-J. And it bugs me a lot if I look to, I have some Spanish-speaking friends, and I have a Havruta. Havruta is a person you study with Talmud and stuff. We study 4 times a week, and he's Argentinian. Sometimes he's not patient to write things in Hebrew. He writes and translated really quick, and I cannot. Like, nope. You fixed that before. Like I cannot do the J thing. It's not part of my Hebrew vocabulary. The other thing that they don't know, Laura's gonna laugh about that, is the difference between B and V. What is the difference about that in Spanish? Y'all got it right. There is no difference. One is called the B corta and the other B larga, the long one and the short one. But they don't really make any difference. So they write everything wrong in Hebrew because they don't know what the difference is. So for example, Shavua Tov, have a good week. We say that at the end of Shabbat, is V and V. Shavua Tov, there are 2 V's. I saw many Spanish speaking saying Shabua Tov. It's a very common thing because for them it's actually the same thing. So this friend of mine was telling he just became a rabbi. So and rabbi in Portuguese or Spanish is called Rabino. So I don't call him Rabino, I call him Chavinu, because they don't know the difference between B and V. So just to mess up with them, I do that. Any other questions, comments? Thank you everyone for joining tonight. Looking forward to seeing all of you. Shabbat. But if you are able to and you want to join us online tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. for services on Zoom, the link is on the website, member portal, like where you find for Shabbat and everything. We're going to start the service at 8 with the service of Slichot, that really unique service that is only done this time of the year, has some particular special melodies. We're going to power it through because we don't have a lot of time. I wish we could sing it for, in some synagogues, they actually start services like an hour earlier during this time of the year just to get that done. We knew that that wouldn't fly here, so we kept the same time.
Natan, is
Yes.
the cantor singing tomorrow morning?
If I wake him up, maybe. He just got his second shot of the vaccine yesterday. He's not feeling great today. So I don't know if he's gonna be able to make it, but I'll text him and see if he can join us. Cool. Thank you everyone for coming. Laura, if you wouldn't mind staying for at least 1 minute so I can ask a couple of questions, that'd be lovely. Bye.